Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retroid Gamecore. It's good to see you. I actually just got home this morning. We had a family vacation this week because it's spring break here in Hawaii, and so we went on a big cruise around all the different islands. I got a lot of good footage and good experiences out of everything, and so I'm going to make a new video about how it is to travel with retro handhelds, specifically with the Steam Deck, which will be similar to a video I did last year, but I learned a lot of things along the way, and so be on the lookout for that, but that's not what we're going to talk about here today. While I was gone, Retroid announced a new handheld device called the Retroid Pocket Flip, and so in this video here today, we're going to go over all the different specs and sizing and pricing and things like that, just to get an idea of whether or not it's going to be worth the upgrade for you. And honestly, I'm a little bit hesitant to even call it an upgrade. It's more like a side grade, especially if you already own a Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. And so those are the things we'll go through here in this video. And so, without any further delay, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, to start, you may have already seen some of this preview footage from Retroid themselves. You can see these are 3D renders, and they do look really sharp. One thing to note here is they have a new sport red color, and it looks pretty nice, but also a little bit glossy. And so you know how it goes with glossy things is sometimes it can attract fingerprints. And so I'll hold my reservations about the coloring and the smudging and things like that for now, although I do think the red does look pretty nice. Now, one of the most important aspects is going to be the specs, and so let's go over those really quickly. To start, the CPU inside of this is going to be exactly the same as on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. That means it's going to have the Unisoc Tiger T618 chipset. That's going to give you 8 cores altogether with a Mali G52 GPU inside. In terms of RAM and internal storage, it's also the same, so we have 4 GB of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage. Also bear in mind this will have a micro SD card slot inside, so you can expand that storage very easily. In terms of the screen, we're looking at the exact same as on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, same dimensions of 4.7 inches and same resolution as well. And for me, I'm pretty happy about that because I think it's a really nice screen, especially for the systems that can run on it. Now, when it comes to power of this chipset and emulation, it's going to be the exact same as I showed in my Retroid Pocket 3 Plus video review, which I'll leave linked down below. Specifically, this means that you'll be able to emulate all the systems up to the PlayStation Portable at an upgraded resolution, so 720p or 3x resolution for PSP, and same thing with Dreamcast and Nintendo 64 as well. I also think that given this form factor, it's going to be a good fit for the Nintendo DS to emulate too. However, if you are looking for that next generation of emulated systems, things like PlayStation 2, GameCube, or Nintendo 3DS, this is not going to be a very good fit, just in the same way that the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus wasn't a great fit for those systems either. In terms of other specs, it'll be very similar to the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, so you'll have micro HDMI out, and then also you'll have 5 GHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.0. All told, when it comes to Android-based devices, Retroid is one of the best out there in terms of price to performance, and so this one should be just as good of a value as the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. The only other spec upgrade that I noticed is that the battery has a bit of an upgrade to 5,000 mAh instead of 4,500 from the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. And I think there's a couple of factors for this. Number one is with a clamshell device, you actually have more space to put more components inside, which means you have room for a larger battery. But then in addition, they have active cooling now with the Retroid Pocket Flip. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. First, let's talk about sizing. Now, Retroid has released a couple different comparison charts, which are really handy, especially since no one else has these actually on hand. Number one, you can see here that the Retroid Pocket Flip is a little bit larger than the Nintendo DS Lite, but then also smaller than the new 3DS XL. And so I think if you're familiar with either of those two other clamshell devices from Nintendo, then you're probably going to get a good idea of the size right here. Now here is a Nintendo 2DS XL, which I actually own here, and you can see that when it's actually closed up, it is pretty small and very pocketable. And so that's going to be one of the best things about the Retroid Pocket Flip is its pocketability. It is going to be a larger device when you open it up, and there are going to be some concessions and compromises to be made when you have this form factor, but if pocketability is a very big and important factor for you, then this might be a really good choice. Now, in terms of non-clamshell devices, here's a comparison with the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. And as you can see, the 3 Plus is quite a bit longer than the Flip, but then also bear in mind the Flip is going to be thicker, especially when closed. And so it's really not an apples to apples comparison here, and I'm excited to get one of these in my hand to really do a more in-depth comparison. But when it comes down to it, it's really going to be about what form factor you prefer. There's a lot of people out there who just really love clamshells. Maybe they had a Nintendo DS back in the day or a 3DS, and so because of that, they really like this idea of being able to close it up and then throw it in your pocket. Meanwhile, there's other people who just want a smaller overall size, and I think the 3 Plus by volume is going to be smaller. But one interesting fact here is that the 3 Plus is not that much lighter than the Flip. In fact, it's only a 35-gram difference between the two. And so that does lead me to believe that the Flip isn't going to be quite as big and bulky as you might think when you think about a clamshell, and so that's pretty interesting. Another unique aspect about the Retroid Pocket Flip are the potential ergonomics. For example, you can see here we have some flared trigger buttons here at the bottom. And I'm especially interested to see how this is going to play out when it comes to one, pocketability, but then also ergonomics when you open it up and start playing it. And so again, I think that's going to be a pretty subtle difference, and we'll have to wait until other people have this one in their hands, but I'm kind of interested to see how it all falls out. Now, given this is a clamshell, there are going to be some concessions, and so I want to talk about that a little bit just in terms of what might be a good fit for you. Number one is the fact that this is not going to have your traditional analog sticks. Instead, it's going to have analog sliders. Now, if you're already familiar with a Nintendo 3DS, you may be comfortable with this design setup, but I know there's many people out there who do not like the idea of sliders, and so this will be very interesting too. A couple of other things that are neat about these sliders is one, they have magnetic hall sensors, and so that should feel very smooth in the hands, but then additionally you can click down on them for L3 and R3. Now I have that 2DS that I mentioned before. This one has a single slider, and so because of that it actually does not click down on L3 or R3. And so that'll be interesting to see the difference between the two when it comes to that. Now I've got a few other features I want to talk about. Number one is the active cooling. This is kind of interesting for me because the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus did not require active cooling inside. In fact, there's a couple vents, but that's about it. And yes, it does get a little bit hot if you really push it, you try to play a GameCube game on it. But at the end of the day, I didn't really feel like it was very necessary. And so it leads me to think of two things. Number one, they have the extra space, so which means they can put an active cooling fan inside, and they have that larger battery to be able to compensate for the energy draw that's going to come from that cooling fan. But number two, and this is pure speculation, but Retroid always releases a Plus version of their handhelds down the line. And so my guess here is there will be a Retroid Pocket Flip Plus sometime in the future, and that's going to have a heftier or beefier CPU inside, which will require active cooling. Now the big question will be, how long of a wait do we have between the Retroid Pocket Flip and the Plus? If you remember, with the Retroid Pocket 2 to the 2 Plus, it was something like a 1.5 year wait between the two. But then between the Retroid Pocket 3 and the 3 Plus, it was only a 3-month difference. And understandably, there were a lot of people upset when they had bought the Retroid Pocket 3, only to hear that there was going to be an upgraded model just a few months later. Now, it doesn't take away from the value of the Retroid Pocket 3, which was a really great device at the time, but there were a lot of people who would rather have waited for the 3 Plus instead. And so, unfortunately, we may see something like this happen again with the Flip. But my hope is that Retroid learned their lesson from the backlash that they got from that, and they're going to wait a little bit longer between these device releases. Next up, we have the analog triggers, which are going to be the first for Retroid with the Pocket Flip. And I think when it comes to this device in particular, it's going to really shine when you start playing something like game streaming, like a driving game, but then also Android games that support analog inputs like Horizon Chase. Unfortunately, one of the systems that's going to do really well with analog triggers is GameCube, and that's not really going to run well on this chipset. And so because of that, this may not be a good fit in that regard, but it will be good for game streaming. Additionally, they've added programmable M1 and M2 buttons like you will find on the Razer Edge and the Odin as well. Now, personally, I've never found a big use for those, but all the same, it is always nice to have extra input options. Additionally, they've mentioned they're going to use double injection molds for their A, B, and XY face buttons. This means it's not going to be painted on and it won't rub off over time. Instead, it's actually going to be part of the button itself. Overall, when you look at this design, it's kind of hard to tell how it's going to feel in terms of ergonomics, but there are a couple things I am thankful for. Number one, the start and select buttons are in the correct area right here on the front. And like I mentioned before, I like the fact that the triggers are flared a little bit. I think it's going to go a long way when it comes to ergonomics. Now, the position of the sliders is kind of interesting too. As you can see here, it has a more PlayStation layout, and they're a little bit more inset into the device. I'm not really sure if this is going to make it more or less ergonomic, and we'll have to wait and see on that one too. In the end, it's kind of hard to say how it's going to feel in the hand, especially when you look at it compared to something like the Nintendo 3DS. Number one, you can see the top screen is going to be quite large for the size of the device compared to something like the Nintendo, but I've also seen a lot of people saying that there is some wasted space here on the bottom just by the fact that it doesn't have a second screen. And Retroid actually addressed this in some tweets, and they basically said that from a software perspective, it would have been a lot of work to try to get a 2-screen setup. And really, from a practical perspective, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to try to do a 2-screen setup right now anyway. After all, only the DS and 3DS even had a 2-screen setup for any sort of games. And realistically, the best way to play 3DS and DS games is going to be on a used 3DS. And so I think your money is better spent if you specifically want those games to buy a 3DS instead. In the end, I think the Retroid Pocket Flip serves a different purpose, and that is to be a clamshell device that can play other systems that the DS and 3DS cannot. And so for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just try to clone the 3DS in the first place. That may be something that we can see maybe 5-10 years in the future, but for right now, I think that this is the right direction for Retroid to take anyway. Either way, once I get my hands on the Retroid Pocket Flip, I'll do a bunch of different size comparisons and everything else between the other clamshell models that are out in the market. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about colors. We have 5 here at launch. We have black, indigo, what they call 16-bit US, which is really the Super Nintendo styling from North America. And then also we have a transparent red called watermelon, and then the sport red that we saw in their video. Now, I haven't decided which one I'm going to order. Definitely going to get the watermelon one, but I'm not sure after that. I usually try to order at least 2 so I can do comparisons. So we'll see, but let me know in the comments below which other one you would like for me to order. Now, personally, I'm a little bit disappointed they're not using the orange color, or the yellow color as I like to call it, which they've been using since the very beginning. I love the contrast of the yellow-orange right here, and then the black buttons. And so it's kind of a bummer that we're not going to see this with the Retroid Pocket Flip, but maybe they'll have some limited edition colors later or something else like that, because I really like this color scheme right here. And then finally, let's talk about price. Now, retail is going to be between $160 and $165 from the start. Now, bear in mind, this doesn't include shipping and any sort of import taxes for your country, and so it may end up being quite a bit more depending on where you live. For example, me in Hawaii, I have to pay with DHL shipping only, and so it's going to be like $40 for shipping. But on the mainland US, it's something like $15. And then in Europe, it can be quite a bit more with other added import taxes, as well as the shipping costs too. And so just kind of check that when you check out and see what the pricing is going to be. Now, if you order it during the first few days of sale, you will get some nice coupons. For example, if you order it in the first 3 days, you will get a $10 off coupon. And then if you order in the 3 days following after that, you will get a $5 off coupon. One thing to note here is that the watermelon and sport red colors are going to be $5 more than the other 3 options. They've also got some other perks going on in their Discord. You can read more about it, but basically if you order it quickly, you have the option of being entered into a giveaway, and you might win some other products from them or other discounts, things like that. So I'll leave a link to their Discord server in my video description in case you want to check that out. And then finally, there's the pre-order time. This is going to start on March 21st at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we're looking at a shipping time to start around April 10th. So I would expect about 3 weeks before you even see your device from the time you order it. Okay, and so wrapping things up here, let's go over some of my thoughts about whether or not I think the Retroid Pocket Flip is going to be a good fit for you, and we'll go over a couple different scenarios. Number one, if you're a big fan of clamshells, you've probably already made up your mind. After all, there are not a lot of good options when it comes to powerful Android devices with a clamshell form factor. You have the Powkiddy X18S, and I've done a couple videos on that, and honestly, I do not recommend it just based on the poor build quality. And then other than that, you have the GPD XD Plus, which honestly is a few years old at this point and probably not going to be worth it either. Now, if you already own a Retroid Pocket 3 Plus and you're not a huge fan of clamshell devices, then this probably is not going to be worth it for that side grade that you'll get. But if you own something like the Retroid Pocket 2 or 2 Plus or 3, then it might be worth it to get that spec bump to the 3 Plus because it is going to play a lot more systems than those. However, one word of caution here is that Retroid is known for upgrading their devices and coming up with a Plus model. And so because of that, you can probably expect to see something in the coming months of a Retroid Pocket Flip Plus. Now, I'm not really sure if it's going to be a 1.5 year wait like it was between the 2 and the 2 Plus, or it'll be 3 months like the 3 and 3 Plus. Either way, I'm pretty sure we're going to see a Retroid Pocket Flip Plus in the future. And so if you do plan on buying the Retroid Pocket Flip, I would say, just as a caution, to make peace with the fact that it may get upgraded later on in the future. In the end, my recommendation would be that before you press that buy button on the Retroid Pocket Flip is to just take a moment and pause and think to yourself, okay, if a new one comes out in 3 or 6 months, is it going to make me feel upset, and is it going to make me feel like I wish I had waited? For me personally, I've always felt like the presence of an upgraded version doesn't invalidate the current one. After all, when you buy something, you're looking at the price and the specs right then and there. And if it makes sense right then if something upgraded comes out later on down the line, it doesn't take away from the other one. After all, this is how technology works. The upgraded versions come out, and sometimes the prices are going to be even better than they were before, but that's actually a good thing. But I get the feeling, I get the idea that some people get upset about the fact that they bought something and then very soon afterwards it's upgraded, and so they think, oh, I should have bought that one instead. It's always going to be a bit of a gamble, and I do think that Retroid didn't do a good job when they released them too closely together between the 3 and the 3 Plus. Regardless of how you feel about that whole thing, I think one of the nice things that Retroid does is they offer the PCB upgrades. So for example, this was a Retroid Pocket 3, and then I put the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus chip inside of it. And it wasn't that hard of an upgrade, it really only took me about 20 minutes altogether. And so now I have the best of the best between having the Retroid Pocket 3 shell that I really liked, but then also the 3 Plus chipset inside. And so hopefully with the Retroid Pocket Flip, they will follow suit like they did with the 2 and the 2 Plus and the 3 and the 3 Plus. In the end, it's kind of hard for me to say whether or not the device is going to be worth buying. After all, I don't have one in my hands just yet, but I am going to order one here in a couple days when they're available, and I'll make sure that I do an in-depth review when it arrives. Either way, I'd be interested to hear what you're going to say in the comments below. Do you think it's worth getting? Is the clamshell form factor going to be worth it? Or are those sliders going to be a deal breaker for you? Or do you wish they had used an upgraded chip? Either way, I'm kind of interested to see your thoughts down below. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.